the lactation consultant came in and was like, so you're probably not going to be breastfeeding your kid because you had a C-section. But
How does that work?
My pediatrician knew I was having a C-section. He knew what day my C-section was and said he was going to be there. And he was. We had him and he see him right after he was born. He was like, I'm going to be at the hospital. I'm going to check your baby, all this stuff. He knew we were having elective C-section. He knew we were, that I was planning to breastfeed and all this stuff. And he was like, not concerned at all. He was not worried about anything. He was like, it happens when it happens. You know what I mean? He's like, it just,
right.
The way that it is. And he's a pediatrician for over 30 years. So now it's been like over 35 to probably about 40 years. Like he's been doing it forever. And I'm like, and I'm pretty sure he knows what he's talking about. But yeah, I got a lactation consultant that was, I don't know if she was more natural, where she was like, so you didn't have a vaginal birth, you can't breastfeed. But you would think as a lactation one, you'd be like, everyone can breastfeed. You know what I mean? like I thought that was kind of their thing. We will make you breastfeed, bring in the pump. And you know what I mean? Like, I swear, like that's because they brought me a pump and I was like,
yeah, they brought me one too.
It was quite intimidating to have that. Like when they wheel in the pump and it's like this big machine, this giant machine, and then you turn on, you're like, yes. Oh my God, it's a freaking motor. Like it's a car motor going to be attached to me to breastfeed my kid or like to pump to try to get whatever. So they were like, we're going to bring it in because we got to get your milk in. And I was like, okay, I'm not making any milk. And I was so lost, like, you know, because again, you're like, it's the first time doing any of this stuff. Your milk don't come in right after you have a kid. It does not come in. But boy, were those nurses coming in and shaming me and being like, your milk's not going to come in because you had a C-section. And they literally put me on a clock. They were like, you got so many hours that your milk comes in or you're not breastfeeding anymore. And I was like, oh my God. So they were like, I was feeding my kid. I was like pumping. I wasn't eating. I wasn't drinking water. I wasn't sleeping. They just were like, I became a machine. Hook her up to a machine. Take the machine off with the baby on there. Like, I was like, Jesus, like you become a robot, like to like, right. It was like, it was so out there. And so by the time it was like, I don't remember if it was the evening, we made it through the night somehow. And I think maybe the next day shift, it was like really super in the morning or something. I don't remember. I can't even tell you, but I'm pretty sure it was the next day. We might've made it to about 24-hour mark. And I had like a mental breakdown. I just started bawling. Because the nurses were coming in and literally telling me like, you're starving your kid. And you know what they were doing? They didn't offer me formula. They wanted me to do donor breast milk. I was like, wait, what? I was like, why can't I? But my pediatrician had already told me, just do formula.
Right.
Just do formula. It's going to be a lot easier for you. And I was like, so I had like a mental breakdown where I was like, I just started bawling and I was like, I'm starving my kid and I'm killing another one of my kids. Like I just started like panic mode of like everything just started coming out. My mom was like, what the hell is happening? Like my mom came into me like freaking out. My husband's like, we got to get the nurse or we got to get somebody because she's like, I was like going like kind of like it was bad. It was really, really bad. And the nurse that came on duty or something, somehow there's one lady, she's real sweet. And she was like, what is happening? Tell me what's happening. And I was like, I had a C-section and they're telling me I can't breastfeed and I'm starving my child. And she was like, who's your pediatrician? And I told her and she just ran out the room and called my pediatrician. And she came back in the room and she's like, your pediatrician's on the way here. He's going to come and check your baby and, you know, whatever. And she was like, we're going to deal with this. And she was like, what's been going on? I was like, they're making me pump and I'm doing this and, you know, whatever. And so she was like, all right, we're going to work out a plan with your pediatrician and not what's going on with all these nurses and all this stuff. And then here comes my pediatrician comes running in like panic mode, like what's happening? Like, okay, like we got to deal with some stuff. He comes in and at the time my baby was sleeping and I'm crying and he just came and here's this nurse and him. And he was like, I'm your pediatrician. I am the doctor of your child. I just seen your kid last night before I went home, and it was like 10:30, 11 o'clock. This is only so many hours later. Nothing's happening to this child. Like, your child is fine. You are not starving your kid. You are going to be breastfeeding your kid. He was like, it's okay to give your kid formula. And I was like, they want to give him somebody else's milk. Like, so he was like, no, they're not. Like, you know what I mean? He was like, let's look at this and figure out what's going on. So then he wanted he had the nurse to start documenting everything. And we came up with like this plan of whatever, but he's like, I'm the one that gets to tell you what's going on. Don't you listen to any of these nurses, because they're just nurses. They do not have anything to do with babies. They don't know anything about any of this. That's my patient. Like, you know, it's like, right. I'll tell you. But he was like so mad but he sat down and he told me like his wife had 2 boys and she wanted to breastfeed. And she was one of those that didn't come up with enough milk. And she was so heartbroken, you know, that she didn't. He was like, guess what? She had a great bonding experience with her kid with giving them formula, and she was fine. And it's not a big deal. And he's like, if we end up at that point, we end up there, and it's totally okay, because I'm here to go down that journey with you, and we'll deal with it, you know. But it was just like one of those of like, oh my God, it was chaos. Like, I'll never forget that. So that's why this time around I find out my pediatrician, because now that we've kind of figured out the hospital, my pediatrician doesn't go to the hospital. Yep. So now I'm like in panic mode. I need to find another pediatrician that needs to go to the hospital to check my kid, because I know there's on-call pediatricians, but I don't know them. They don't know me. They don't have we don't have a relationship. So I was trying to look up I've got a couple of names that I was like, okay, I'm going to try to call them and be like, hey, I'm having a baby. Can we meet? And I'm going to try to get in with them. But I'm like, oh no, I need a pediatrician, because if I've learned from my last experience, I'm so glad I had a pediatrician. Who knows what would happen? I probably would have had oh God, I don't even know. I probably would have went to postpartum depression really bad, because it was like, nobody was listening to me. Right. Nobody cared about my feelings. And everybody was trying to be like, you elected a C-section, so therefore you were a bad mom and you cannot breastfeed your kid, and blah, 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 blah. And actually my milk came in before we left the hospital.
Oh, and yeah, mine took 5 days.
Yeah,
it varies.
It's supposed to be, I think 3 to 5 days is about normal. It's like the average. And they're like, whatever, but 5 days I think is the typical of what it is supposed to be. It's supposed to be 5 days. You're supposed to get the other stuff before, you know what I mean? It's like your milk isn't supposed to come in when they're first born, because because a lot of milk comes in. It's not like a little bit of milk. Like you're like, it's like the floodgates are unleashed. You know what I mean? You would suffocate your kid if it came in right after they were born and stuff like that. But it was so I had all this crap. My milk came in before we left the hospital, within let's see, that was day 2, probably that evening. The next morning I had already had my milk come in, but they were there was a lot of pressure, and there was all this stuff, and I was pumping and feeding and, whatever. And then as it turns out, I was feeding my kids so well, because whatever happened, panic mode, I guess. I was like, oh my God, I didn't feed my kid, that he became too big, too fast. And we had to slow down. Normally they tell you at a certain point, okay, now you can, not this many hours, but now you can. No, I had to slow down sooner, because I actually was producing too much milk, and he was drinking too much. And my pediatrician was like, it's totally fine. He was like, you were meant to breastfeed. He's like, you wanted to, you did. He's like, but it was a lot to get here. And then I was like, should I keep pumping? He's like, that's up to you. But just so you know, pumping. And I was like, I don't want to keep pumping. I decided after a while, I was like, pumping sucks. I hate
it. Does. Oh my God.
Nightmare.
At one point I think I was still in the hospital, and I was like, my baby's not here. He's in the NICU. I'm a cow. I'm hooked up to this stuff. Yeah. And when they wanted to do I assume it's every hospital, they wanted to do a psychiatric thing before you leave. And because of COVID, they weren't having anybody come in. So they were doing it all via Zoom or Skype or whatever. And I was pumping, and the nurse came in and said, well, this is the only time that the psychologist can meet with you, so you have to just have her on the phone, like video chat, while you're hooked up to the pump. And I was like, but I don't want to do that. And my husband was in the NICU, and so I was like, who was going to hold my phone? Like, I don't. How am I supposed to do this? And they're like, but you have to pump for this many minutes at this like level, or your milk's not going to come in. And, you know, like, and I was like, so am I supposed to just take this call with this random person with like, yeah. And that's what I had to do. And it was like super weird. It's like, well, this is the only time, right? This is the only time that this person can fit you in. I was like, then find a different person. They were like, no, it has to be this person. I was like, oh, okay. So weird. But yeah, and with me, I wanted to breastfeed right away. The pediatrician that we had lined up didn't have privileges at my hospital. So when we got to the hospital, they were like, well, you just have to pick someone. And I was like, well, how am I supposed to pick someone? And like, well, there's this many doctors, just pick one and they'll be attending to your kid. And I was like, okay. So I was like, well, that looks like a name that I recognize because, you know, I kind of grew up around there. And I was like, okay, so pick that person. But then he didn't want me to breastfeed because of one of the medications that I was on. He was like, well, you can't breastfeed in the hospital. And nobody told me that that's why I couldn't breastfeed. Like, nobody communicated that to me when we were doing skin to skin. And I kept asking, am I supposed to be breastfeeding? Should I be doing this? What am I supposed to be doing? And that was what I kept asking over and over and over again. It didn't come out until later that this particular pediatrician said, no, she can't breastfeed. She has to follow up with her pediatrician once she is discharged from the hospital. And then he was in nursery at that point, and his blood sugar was at a critical level, which we didn't know about. And so my husband came back and he was like, you're going to be really mad, but they gave him formula. And I was like, why did no one talk to us about any of this? Like, my birth plan essentially was, give me all of the medication. Just give me the epidural as soon as you can. I don't care. And my plan is to breastfeed. So, but yeah, so Evan didn't nurse until he was about 2 weeks old. And the lactation consultants weren't coming in and out. But he had no problem like combo feeding. It was totally fine. I was pumping the whole time. But yeah, I delivered at a baby-friendly hospital, but like, I guess, I don't know if it was because it was COVID and they just weren't focusing on that aspect because lactation consultants weren't allowed to go in and out. And they were like, well, we can do it virtually. And I was like, well, how do you do that exactly? How are you supposed to check a latch that way? Or, you know, figure out, but I mean, it didn't matter. But I remember when I finally got to the NICU with him, it was such a fight to get 30 milliliters into him. It was like, okay, well, he's only getting a teeny tiny amount, and then he's falling asleep, and he only has, you know, a half an hour window. He feeds, and and I went looking through the pictures a couple of days ago, and like my husband's there holding him, and got those little teeny tiny ready to feed bottles, and he's like, okay, well, we've got 15 milliliters in him. I was like, okay, I don't have any idea really what it's supposed to be because nobody talks to you.
Yeah. That's another thing. You're pumping and they don't tell you about like pumping, like how much you're supposed to pump. You know what I mean? Are you getting stuff out? Like whatever. And I don't know. It was such a weird thing. And we did the whole, at first when I was pumping between like pumping and feeding, they were getting the little syringe thing, the little tiny little thing, and like giving him, you know, basically whatever. But it's like, but if I'm getting that out when I'm pumping and then you know what I mean? I'm going between like pumping and then feeding and then pumping and feeding. I'm like, he's getting something like,
right.
you know, but they were trying, but he didn't like the little syringe thing. Like it was like, it like bothered him. He'd be like, like it like panicked him. And it was, and the thing is I learned later, like he actually was pretty good. Like he knew how to latch, he knew what he's doing and stuff like that. And he just knew whatever, but the other stuff he didn't like. And then I learned also from the pediatrician that if I started like formula and doing the combo feeding early, you're good. But then I pumped all this milk and I was so proud. Like I pumped all this milk at home and had all these bags and, you know, whatever. And then when I was like starting to kind of like, oh, I'm going to slow down and I'll just give him a bottle with, you know, with breast, it's still my milk, but I would just put it in a bottle. He didn't want a bottle. At this point, he had figured it out. Like, I don't like bottles. Like, I don't like those things, you know, those aren't the same as my mom. Like he was smart enough. So then I was like, dang it. And then that's when my doctor laughed because I was like, what do I do? And then he's like, well, some people save it until they kind of get a little bigger. And then you can put in like a sippy cup or something. Like you can do that if you want to. And I was like, okay, that's so weird. Like, you know what I mean? I was like, okay, like, it was just such a weird experience. Like, and then, I mean, there was a whole thing of like, if you make it to a year, like a year is your goal of breastfeeding, because once you've got over a year, my pediatrician explained it like so well. It's like the first year is most important for like nutrients, for food, for whatever. But once the baby's a year old, it's just comfort. You're just breastfeeding for comfort. It doesn't, you know, people stay and breastfeed for years on end, but it's doesn't do anything. You're still going to bond with your kid. You're still going to whatever.
Right.
And I think I got to, cause I was like, okay, we're at a year. My pediatrician's like, so how long are you going to breastfeed? And I was like, I have no idea. Your mind, I was like, I'm going to make it to that year. But it was like every few months you go through like a whole, like, I don't want to say like a grieving process, but you have to go through like a mental, like, is this worth it? I hate breastfeeding. I hate it sucks. So like at 3 months, I was like, this is like torture. And I stopped pumping. I stopped whatever. I was like, I hate it. And then my kid wouldn't take a bottle like with my milk. And I was like, I really hate it. I can't stop. I'm stuck doing this forever. Like, you know? And so then I made it to like 6 months and I was like, yay, I made it 6 months. And then I was like, why does anyone ever want to breastfeed? Breastfeeding sucks. Like, you know, and then so many months later, I was like, this is the worst thing ever. I hate doing this. Why am I still doing this? Right. And then I made it to a year because a year is what I kept like hearing from my people. Just make it to a year and then you've done it. Like, or you don't have to, you could stop anytime. I was like, I'm going to make it to a year, even though it sucks. And then I made it to a year and I was like, I made it here. And then he's like, okay, how long? And I was like, I don't know. I never thought about that. I was only trying to get to the year. Like, I was like, just trying to get to that finish line. And then you don't think about it, but you can't stop. Like you have to like lean down. There's a lot of things you have to do or like messes up your body. So then I was like, okay, all right, we're over a year. Now we need to like make a plan. And so I would like slowly over a process of time, take out a feeding and then take out a feeding. And then by the time we got to, I think I made it to about a year and a half. It was like really close. It might not have just been at a year and a half, but it might've been really close. That might've been like a little bit under that year and a half. But I finally had it where there was just one feeding. And then finally I like took it away. And then it's like so funny because here the whole time I was like, I hate breastfeeding. Like you kind of get used to it after a while, but sometimes you have those moments where like, this sucks. There's nothing fun about this. I'd rather just be, here's a bottle, here's a baby, you have fun. I'm going to go take a nap or something. But but you don't think about that. And so when I was like stopping and I had that last one and I was like, okay, this is the last time I'm going to feed him. Da-da. And then afterwards I just was crying like, this is the last time. Oh, this is so sad. And then the next day my husband's like, you could feed him today. When I was like, no, I must stop breastfeeding. And so like every night, like at the same time that I would normally like give him like that last feeding, like before bed or whatever, I was like, I'm not breastfeeding him anymore. Like he doesn't need me. And that went on for like a little bit. And then I was like, okay, now I'm good. Whatever was going on hormone wise, like it's gone. Like, you know, I was like, dude, like because that's what it is. It's all like your body playing tricks on you. But I was like, dude, it was just, oh yeah, like, no. And I'm like, no, this time around, we'll see how I feel about stuff. And I'm like, I know I can make it a year. Will I make it a year and a half? Maybe I'll just make it a year. You know what I mean? Like, I have no idea. We'll kind of see how things go, because now I have a kid, an older kid,
right.
and then a baby, and that makes it very different. So I'm like, so we'll kind of see how I'm feeling about stuff. I mean, it's still me that will be probably doing most of the feedings anyway. So I'm like, I'll try, but I'll probably still have moments where I'm like, I hate breastfeeding. Like, why do we do this? Why do we torture ourselves?